old, and he had grown up with the Pilgrims. He had known them all personally. Well, they carried him in a chair down to the waterfront, and as the reports go, they asked him what was of significance on the waterfront. He said, well, they told me that they landed right over there by that big rock, and that big rock was very important to them. And that became the legend of Plymouth Rock, and the point of the first celebration and many to come. At one point, the rock was split in thirds. 2/3 of it was taken up into the center of Plymouth. People used to come along with a hammer and chip off a piece of it and take it home as a souvenir. And I understand there's a chunk of it in the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. Well, again, on another one of those centennials, the tricentennial of 1920, the state of Massachusetts purchased the land on both sides of the rock, tore down all the old wharfs that were there, did some filling, and created the park that you see here today. They then reassembled as much of the rock as they could find, as less than a third its original size, and placed it down on the waterfront approximately where the original had been. Then built that big portico over the top of it. If you continue to look along the waterfront, you'll see the big marina with all the yachts and boats in it. Well, between the marina and the state park, there's a little outlet there, and that's where Town Brook flows into Plymouth Harbor. And Town Brook is also an important part of that Pilgrim story, which we will get to shortly. Notice over on the left-hand side of the vessel, you see a large granite block breakwater. It's 3/4 of a mile long. You can walk out on it. It was completed in 1960, and when it was completed, they dredged out behind it and created the mooring field, which you see here today. We have on average an 11-foot tide here in Plymouth. At times of full moon, the tide can be even greater, as much as 12 and 13 feet, higher highs and lower lows. But we just passed full moon, so we've been experiencing higher and higher tides, higher and lower. We use that breakwater as kind of a guide to where we are in the tide cycle. You can see that brown line that runs along the breakwater. If you can't see the breakwater line, you know that we're at high tide. It was low tide this morning at 10:50 feet, so we're now on a flood tide, an incoming tide, and it will be high tide this afternoon at 4 o'clock, 4:08. Looking at the breakwater again, it looks like we've got about 5 feet to go on the tide cycle. If it were low tide, we were down some 6 or 7 feet from where we are right now, we would see on both sides of the channel large sand flats that are exposed at low tide. Plymouth Harbor was shallow before it was dredged, and the Mayflower would never have come into this inner portion of the harbor. It would have stayed out near the end of the point where we're headed. And they would have used that little boat, the shallop I pointed out alongside of the Mayflower, they would have used it to transfer the Pilgrims into shore. So when Elder Font said that they landed over there by that rock,